we haven't covered some of these topics before. Mr. Cox already did speak a little bit to the directors and the number and the appointment, and I'd like to just touch on that again briefly and then move on to some of the other points that, some of the other issues that the administration has raised and that we don't see addressed yet.
And you anticipated my next question. Thank you.
All right. We do appreciate that since we had provided some language and some comments that some of those we do see have been incorporated in the agreement, and it's of a technical nature and some important points. Nevertheless, starting at the beginning with the directors, the fundamental issue, I guess, on the appointment of Colorado Springs directors has two aspects to it. First, the city of Colorado Springs has the lion's share of population, the majority of impervious surfaces, and also the revenue. And so it certainly is appropriate that it have a majority of the membership on the board. However, because of the nature of the form of government that the city has gone to, with the executive really controlling construction, the forces of the city, operation and maintenance, it is fundamentally important that the mayor have the ability to appoint directors that represent the interests of the executive and the administration. And so we don't really feel that limiting it to elected officials is appropriate or in the best interest of the public. Those appointments can be made for responsible city officials. They can be made to people in the community who have expertise in the area, members of the business community, and they would have the ability to serve well on the board. I do appreciate what folks have said here today, that you wanted there to be responsibility, but there would be just as much responsibility with those board members. And so following that, I mean, we would like to see and would recommend that directors be appointed by the mayor, and that they not be limited to elected officials of the city, because the only elected officials of the city other than the mayor are, of course, the city council. And the city council is the legislative branch setting policy at the high level on legislative matters, but it is the mayor and the staff of the city that executes and runs the city, engages in public projects, fixes flood damage, and does all of those things. So we really do believe it's appropriate for the directors to be appointed by the mayor and not to be required to be elected officials, and that such appointees, all of the appointees, be permitted to vote as members of the board, even though they're not elected officials. With respect to the supermajority, I think the same concepts come into play, that if there's a supermajority with a requirement of members from the city of Colorado Springs, that those be split between appointments by the city council and appointments by the mayor. We had suggested that with respect to the items for which a supermajority vote are required, that one of the items listed is the identification of flood-related emergency needs referenced in section 6C5. And in that section and in section 6C5, we think that sometimes the performance of a response to flood emergency needs to be immediate, and that should be stricken from there, that with respect to the expenditure of funds for flood emergency needs, that's a decision that's important, that needs to be made by each individual jurisdiction and not by the board.
Tom, can you tell us where you are again? I'm sorry.
Okay, that's on page 5.
3D3.
Yes, paragraph 3D3.
Thank you.
With respect to supermajority, we also would propose that since the hiring of any manager or staff, which is provided for under the powers of the board, an executive director or a manager of the authority has a great deal of administrative power with respect to the operation and budgeting and what have you, with respect to the authority activities. And that authority and administrative ability has been something we're aware of from the operation of PPRTA, that we believe that the hiring of any manager or executive director of the PPRDA or the authority's enterprise also require a supermajority vote. And that would be in addition, again, to that on page 6 to 3D with a new paragraph 7. I didn't see if it was corrected in here, but on the removal of directors, on paragraph F, obviously, the mayor should have the ability to remove any directors that he appoints, not the city council. Moving on to paragraph K on page 7. We had just raised the issue of why there's a security council seat basically for the city of Fountain, that they're the only named party that has a reserved seat on the executive committee. We realize that probably because of the voting rights, other people may, other parties to the agreement may, by virtue of their numbers, have seats on the authority, but it's not mandated and is certainly not required. So it's unusual to see that the city of Fountain has a reserved seat. For paragraph M on page 8, again, with respect to the existence of a quorum, we again feel that the requirement of a quorum having directors from the city of Colorado Springs ought to again be split so that both the executive and legislative branches have that membership for a quorum to exist. With respect to section 4C on page 9, we previously raised in the meeting with Mr. Munger and Mr. Walker this issue regarding nonprofits. And so we had expressed a legal question as to whether nonprofits could be treated differently from other types of commercial uses. In other words, if the service fee is truly based upon impervious surface area, then a church parking lot or the parking lot of a nonprofit organization or a school is essentially the same as the impervious surface area of a mall or a big box store. The seminal case on drainage service fees was Bloom versus City of Fort Collins, and it was upheld that nonprofits and religious institutions and all those organizations should pay the fees as well, since they're service fees, not really different in kind from providing water or electricity or other types of things. It's an issue that it's not addressed yet. I realize that the board may want to go forward on the basis that it is, but it's just a legal question that we don't feel has really been fully vetted, and I know that you were working with council on that, and they should examine that issue.
Tom, can you wait a minute? President King has a question.
Tom, some of these things are kind of outside the scope of what we've heard before in the issues of what we saw from the latest draft of the mayor's was very limited, and so I'm just a little curious that is this you're using the word "we" a lot. So are you, as you're speaking?
Clarify that.
Is he speaking for the mayor, or Or is David also going to speak for the legislature and the council on this, on what their perspective would be, or?
Mayor Bach and I and staff went through this IGA, and we got you a copy. It should be, we sent it to everybody today.
There were no red lines on it.
You get that around 1 o'clock? I'm sorry, we'll get you the red line copy because that was sent out, but Tom is only, he took what the mayor and I and staff came up with and redlined it in this. This is not Tom's opinion, other than we had the question about the legality of treating the nonprofits differently than the commercial properties. That was more of a legal question. But this is as a result of Mayor Bach, myself, and staff's review of this current IGA. And I apologize that you don't have the redlined version, but we'll get that to you.
Now, this is different than what we had just, I think, on Friday. The concerns are dramatically different, and we, I think if that's the case, if Tom is speaking for you as a client, then I think David should be able to take the same stuff and speak for us as a client, as the legislative body, to see what the response would be to that. I just.
And the turnaround time has been short on this, actually. I mean, I appreciate that we got it. Friday, we've had discussions, and to Dave and Kevin's credit, they've been working with us, but we, as of lunch today, put the final touches on what we were concerned with in terms of issues. And David, or Tom does bring up the point that I wanted to make, is that with the change of government, it is unique and it is different because the mayor is charged with the operation and the rest of the elected officials here are not. He has a unique position in implementing what's decided as policy. So that's the basis of many of his concerns and issues.
I think the issue that for us sitting here today is, as council, as a legislative body that will adopt this is a lot of information that we have no idea whether it's legislative or whether it's administrative, and it's I mean, it's just a lot of stuff that we haven't seen, so it's really if it can be covered in a amendment like we talked about before, that's administrative activity, then I think it should be done that way, as we talked about the financial stuff, as opposed to putting it in the IGA. So that's just my overall concern for.
Well, we appreciate that you've listened to us, but these items are key to the executive branch's support of this whole issue. So we just want to make sure that that's known and it's known publicly.